Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to just start off talking about our Australian native bees by looking very quickly at bee evolution because it had implications for our native bees. Flowering plants evolved about 130 million years ago. Bees are believed to have evolved from solitary wasps about 100 million years ago. But for 35 million years, the interaction between bees and flowers doesn't appear to have done very much. After the KT wipeout of the dinosaurs, 66 million years ago, things took off dramatically. And from then on, bees and flowers have co-evolved. Now, worldwide, there are believed to be about 20,000 species of bees. We have about 10% of them, close to 2,000 species. But of these, 40 are stingless. 11 species build hives. So to get stingless bees that also build hives, you're really scratching to find them. Now, our native bees are only small generally, but they can be up to 24 millimetres long. The hive building species are tropical or subtropical, and this comes about as a result of that evolution I was talking about. At the time of the KT extinction, Australia was attached to Antarctica. Its flora was mainly gymnosperms, pine trees, no flowering plants very much at all. So the early bee evolution after that extinction did not occur in Australia. It occurred in warmer places. And our bees have come from those places. There is some connection with South Africa, but it appears to be mainly from Asia. So they're tropical or subtropical. And Tetragonula carbonaria is the only hive-building species found coastal this far south. It does go to south of Sydney, but the further south you go, the harder the bees have to work to survive. Now, I'll just flick through some of our bee species. This is a teddy bear. A lot of people look at it and say bumblebee. It's not. It's a true bee. It's a cute little, it's about the size of a honeybee. It's not that little, but it's a cute little animal and quite docile, even though it can sting. You can sort of swat it out of the way if it comes around you. Blue-banded bees are very common in this area. On the left side are males waiting around for a female. That's a female on the right. Another is the orange-tailed resin bee. This is common in the Newcastle area as well. It has a habit of stealing resin from other native beehives, and it builds little resin cells, and it loves the mortar joints in brickwork. So it's not uncommon to find them there. The leafcutter bee is another interesting little one. You may sometimes find neat little circles about 1.5 centimetres in diameter cut out from your leaves of your garden plants. It cuts this circle out, rolls it up, and takes it back to its hive, to its cell, where it's excavated in the ground. I've seen one in a pot plant, and it forms its little cell with the leaves and lays its egg in there. These other bees are indicative of the fact that many of them are small and black. The giant carpenter bee, however, is not. It loves to make a cell in woodwork, hence the name. It's not as big as the teddy bear, but just as cute. And the sweat bee, named because it has a habit of landing on people to get moisture from their sweat. The cuckoo bees are not uncommon around Newcastle either. These are usually very colourful, attractive, and as their name indicates, they've got a habit of laying their eggs in the cells of other solitary bees where the egg, like the cuckoo egg, the bird cuckoo, the egg catches first, takes over the resources, and even eats the larvae of the other bee. Masked bees, named because of the characteristic facial features. Again, small and black. I mentioned the blue-banded bee, and this is actually a blue-banded bee entering its cell, excavated in an earth bank. Not uncommon for them. Now, a lot of the solitary bees, like the carpenter bee, like to burrow into wood and make their nests in there. Lately, we've been encouraging people, particularly young people, to build bee hotels to encourage these bees. As you probably understand, it's not that often that a bee can find a piece of timber that's just the right state of rotten to be able to excavate it in the right spot where it's going to be sheltered from the weather, etc. So we're encouraging this in the hope that our youngsters will grow up appreciating all bees more as they get on. We've got one species, as I mentioned here, Tetragonula carbonaria, the sugar bag bee. There is another species that comes this far south, but it tends to go to the drier areas inland, and that's Ostropalea. People have been bringing other Tetragonula species down from Queensland with some mixed success. Tetragonula hawkingsi is one that's being tried, but temperature seems to be the big issue. In winter, the bees, like all nectivorous animals, have a very hard time in late winter, and that's when hives will die, as will honey eaters and other animals like that. This is just a photo of the entrance to a Tetragonula hive. It's not obvious, certainly not as obvious as a honeybee hive entrance, but if you've seen them once or twice, you tend to look for that little hole with the bees guarding the entrance. Now, life in a native bee hive. Between 6,000 and 10,000 bees normally in a Tetragonula hive. The social structure is very similar to honeybees, except that as well as a queen, there are princesses. This is an interesting feature, that a mated queen in a Tetragonula hive will, a mated queen in a Tetragonula hive will tolerate unmated queens within the hive. If that mated queen were to die, one of the princesses, the unmated queens, steps up to take its place, and there's a mating swarm held outside the hive where many of the hive bees will gather in a tornado of bees that swirls around, and this may go on for a week or more, but eventually a queen is mated and the hive continues. The sterile workers play a similar role to honeybee workers. They start off tending brood, looking after the queen, and then after they've spent some time doing that, they're kicked out as field workers because by that stage they are expendable. Most of them will end up dying in a spider's web. The Tetragonula bees last about 50 days. They don't tend to get out of bed under 18 degrees, and they die if the temperature in the hive reaches 42. Now, 18 degrees is when they become active, unless it's rainy or windy. They're very picky about when they'll actually go out, but they're very small animals, and if the winds are high, they'll expend a lot of energy foraging, energy that they probably can't afford, so they're better to stay in bed. They the foraging workers will travel up to 0.5 kilometre. I believe honeybees will travel about 5 kilometres. So they're much more localised than honeybees. And it does mean that if you were to move a tetragonula hive, you have to move it less than 1 metre or more than 1 kilometre. If you move it from one side of your yard to the other, 4 metres away, say, the bees will go out and forage and they'll go back to where the hive used to be. And they'll hang around there until they die. So it is actually better to move a hive from one side of my yard to the other. I will cart it from Newcastle to Tea Gardens, leave it for 3 weeks and then bring it back. Now, this is inside a tetragonula hive. I'm fascinated by the brood which forms a spiral. The bees start their brood at the bottom of the hive and they slowly build it up to the top. And by the time they've reached the top, the brood at the bottom has gone through the larval stages, the pupal stage, and has hatched. That is then cleaned away. All of the cells are torn down and dumped outside the hive as garbage. And the brood is then completely rebuilt with new propolis. This is an advantage to the bees because it means that disease is discouraged in the hive. But that spiral is characteristic of Tetragonella carbonarium. Now, Tetragonella and other native bees do make honey. Other hive-dwelling native bees make honey. In Tetragonilla's case, it's stored in grape-sized pots, the sugar bags, as they're called, and just outside of the main brood of the hive, on the outside edge. The solitary bees collect nectar, but they don't seem to make honey. They collect nectar and feed it directly to their larvae without processing it into honey. A Tetragonula hive may produce about 375 to 500 grams of honey a year. Compared to honeybee hives, that's minuscule, I know. The honey itself tends to be a bit runny. In some hives, it has a particularly resinous taste. From the resin that the bees use to make their propolis taints the honey. I don't particularly like it on toast, but I find it yummy in yoghurt. Now, I don't know why, but the resin and the yoghurt seem to go together for me. It was prized by Indigenous peoples, and I have heard stories of Aboriginals catching a single tiny tetragonula and sticking a small feather to it so that they could follow it back to its hive. Now, that bee is minute, and it must have really struggled to fly with that feather stuck to it. And since they didn't have magnifying glasses, and that just sticking the feather to it would have been a pretty feat, I reckon. The native bee honey was called sugarbag, and that's what's been used to describe them these days, sugarbag bees. Now, there are native bees that are under threat. We don't see that many. We see some of the common ones, the blue-banded bee and the teddy bears, and the resin bees are common around this area, but there's a lot that I have never actually seen in the wild. Land clearing and habitat destruction has been put forward as an issue. However, with Tetragonula, I find that urban areas are much better for them. In the wild, you get a hive about once every 50 hectares. I have seen 40 Tetragonula hives in a backyard. They weren't all doing as well as they could have, but they were surviving. Urban areas have plants that are in flower all the year round, and it gets around that late winter time when resources are particularly scarce for nectivorous animals. Glyphosate, Roundup, has been seen to impact the gut microbes of all bees, and that can have real devastating implications. Climate change has been put forward as an issue. I don't think it's as big an issue as it might be, because with any warming, these tropical bees are going to find that they can extend their range. Of course, when it comes to hives in the backyards, extreme weather events can be devastating. People often mistake native bees for flies, wasps or flying ants. I've seen that myself, where they were described as a swarm of mosquitoes, and a person was trying to spray them with mortine. And that comes to insecticides, which will be devastating if used around a beehive. Invasive predators, small hive beetle is a major issue. There's native predators as well. Syrphid fly is devastating. The disease-causing bacteria are always an issue, but we don't seem to have any at the moment. Natural predators, ants, geckos, wrens, robins, wasps, flies, and even cane toads. I noticed one thing that isn't on there is spiders, but they are certainly common predators. They're part of our ecosystem. They pollinate the native plants, and they really are part of the whole ecology of the land. They do contribute to pollination of food and pasture crops, but there is an issue with this. Honeybees are non-discriminatory and tend to visit any flower they come across. Tetragonula bees are picky. They will get a taste for a particular flower, and that's what they'll go to. And it might be the pumpkin flowers that you want pollinated in your backyard, but it might not too. So there's no way of telling if the native bees are going to do the job that you want them to do for a specific vegetable plant. This is something that we put up to try and encourage children to look after our bees and to build the hotels and just to notice them. I'll very quickly finish this one. Interaction. I have found often that there are feral beehives and native beehives in the same tree when trees are being felled for clearing. That's probably because the native bees are being protected by the feral bees. And competition doesn't seem to be an issue. Native bees and feral bees or honeybees will forage together without worrying each other at all. The ANBA, the Australian Native Bee Association, conducts workshops and things to try and encourage people to look after the native bees and to keep hives in urban areas. Thank you. Any questions?